You say goodbye, but I say hello. Welcome to the Bionicle Inspiration series. The Tahu of your Toa Mata will be leading the charge and leading the team and inspiring you to make some pretty awesome stuff. So this is a bit of a requested theme, one I've actually had for quite a while, and I've managed to put together some pretty good mocks that I think articulate it very well. And on articulation, that's the theme. It is articulation. We're going to talk about different mocks that really utilize articulation. You might be a little confused as to what that means. It might make more sense as the episode progresses, but putting it into a few words very quickly, essentially, we're going to just look at how to make mocks that are superposable. You know, it's one thing to design a really cool and awesome looking mock, but making one that also is superposable and has a lot of different positions and poses you can put it in, or it can swing a sword, cross its arms, fold its legs, whatever. If a mock can do that, then it's pretty cool. Doesn't necessarily guarantee that it makes it an incredible mock, but you might be someone who likes to play with your sets or play with your mocks. So having a nice level of posability could really help with that. And we'll discuss some of the other pros and cons of having a really well-articulated mock as we progress. So let's progress. This is the first mock. It's by Shubi 4000 and is called Jejing or something like that. So in terms of posability, this is the more kind of simplified and easy route to having a really super posable mock. And the way this is done is using a lot of prefab limb pieces. And you might be like, but Ben, I've heard you say this term prefab limbs before. What does it mean? Basically what it means is if you take a look at any Lego set, they have those kind of prefab limbs in them. So, you know, stuff like you're seeing now, kind of leg pieces, these typical kind of, you know, arm pieces, upper arms, lower legs, feet, stuff like that. Your sort of stock standard parts that make up kind of the bulk of a specific body part that would have come in a Bionicle set or even in certain Hero Factory sets or Bionicle G2 or whatever. Any of your construction stuff. That's sort of your more prefab limb part. And your Lego sets are toys. They're made to be able to pose very effectively and very well because they're a toy. You're supposed to play with them. And if it's posable, that's the best way to do so. So straight up, do what the Lego company does. Use those prefab limb pieces because they're made, they are designed to be superposable. And as we see on this mock here, it works quite well. Taking a look at the lower legs here, these are your simple Enika leg pieces with typical leg armor on them. Even added this foot piece here onto the lower leg there, just to kind of buff it out a bit more, give it a little bit something extra, you know. But for the most part, they pose very effectively. And yeah, you can add little bits of armor on there that a set may not have done. You know, might have just put that one lower leg piece on and that's it. Only one piece makes up that lower leg. Well, you could add a foot or a few other things on here to just kind of detail it out or add some armor to it. And that's totally up to you for whatever you're aiming to build on that specific mock. And if you want to take the plunge and go a little bit further, I don't think this mock does it here. I was trying to figure out how he's done this torso piece here. It might not even be an official Lego piece. It might be a third-party company piece. I'm not actually sure. I don't quite know what... Just looking at some of these pictures, I wasn't quite able to see exactly what this piece is. But it also does look like a prefab limb piece, like an Enika torso or something like that. But if you did want to kind of branch out a little bit further and you're like, yeah, I like this prefab limb design thing. They do pose super well. I'm going to use stuff like that. But you want to kind of go a little bit more complex with the mock. Well, there's nothing wrong with just starting simple with that and going, okay, well, I'm going to use prefab limbs on the arms and the legs. But the torso, I'm going to have that be custom. And what I mean by custom, I don't necessarily mean, you know, cutting pieces, painting pieces, or 3D printing some torso or whatever. No, I mean just instead of actually using a prefab piece, you know, getting a bunch of Technic pieces together, some CCBS, other stuff, some ball joints or whatever, and designing your own custom-shaped torso. And, you know, you have specific armor be in certain areas, or you have a different angle to it that your typical prefab limb piece wouldn't necessarily have. And so that's up to you. And again, you don't have to do that with the torso. You could do the same with the upper legs, lower legs, arms, head, feet, whatever you want. And by all means, if you're a little bit more new to construction building, Bionicle building, whatever you want to call it, just start small. Just do one part of the body be custom for now, and so you can work your way up into having it be totally custom. And then from there, you can really start to branch out even further and really experiment with how you build. But, you know, for now, don't be afraid to use some of the prefab limb pieces that come in sets. In terms of just kind of in general, if you're aiming on having a good amount of posability on a mock, the kind of rule of thumb that I always follow, and this is something ShadowGear6335 also follows, he basically taught it to me, was kind of aiming to just have at least 90 degrees of posability on a knee or an elbow, and it'll be fairly realistic as a result. The actual human body does bend a little bit further than that, but for the most part, if you can get at least 90 degrees, you're effectively able to have a good amount of poses happening. So that's something to always aim for. But if you get further, or even if you get a little bit less, no one's going to come to your house and arrest you. Like, it's totally fine. Do what works for you. But if you're able to get about that angle, you should be okay. And ideally too, I would always kind of recommend having a pretty like open ball joint to some degree. Yet we take a look at these prefab limb pieces here. There's not much blocking the ball joint there. There's a little bit on the knee here, but that's pretty realistic. A knee doesn't bend all the way up like that. And if it does, you need to see a doctor. But for the most part, yeah, you can get that 90 degrees and a little bit more just with how that limb is actually designed. And so if you are planning on going custom, aim for something similar. And if it does bend forward like that, you don't have something to sort of stop it like that. It really doesn't matter, just don't bend it forward. Some limb pieces can be also a little bit different as well. A lot of the typical sets have the upper legs and the upper arms having the socket connection, and then the ball tends to attach to the lower arms or the lower legs. If you flip it upside down, specifically on the arms, you can get the arms to actually cross. You take a look at the limbs here on this mock. The way that CCBS piece is designed is there's the ball, and then hugging it on both sides is the way that it actually physically connects to the rest of the piece. So the limb isn't really able to bend the opposite direction. It can only go that sort of over 90 degrees as it bends up and bends down and kind of essentially like flexes his muscle kind of thing. You can't actually physically have it go to the side, which you need it to go to the side if you want it to cross the arms, that sort of thing. We'll see some more examples of this as we go. Obviously, it's a little bit difficult right now if I don't have physical pictures showing it. Maybe in post, Ben, you can add some pictures so things are a bit more clear. We'll see what we'll do, but this is just one example for now, and I'm laying down a lot of different information, so if you're not getting it all in your head, it should come through in the rest of the episode. If not, give it a rewatch. Maybe then it'll sink in a bit more. And that's always a good thing with learning, is just to have it wash over you a few times. Not everyone remembers things the first time around. So if you're really looking to work on your articulation here, hopefully this is a good guide for you. Besides the point though, quickly touching upon this actual mock here. Obviously it's superposable and touches upon a lot of things we already discussed, but I really like the color scheme. Super nice. Kind of looks like he's a toe of ice. That's nice. And also, I really like that he's used this Hero Factory torso piece here in the middle. Just the way the shoulders kind of flare up like that. Kind of reminds me of like icicles or something. I think it really fits with the Tower of Ice. And also is kind of reminiscent of the way that Gelu's mask actually kind of goes up like that, looking kind of like icicles and stuff like that. It works well. I think it's pretty cool and effectively showing a Tower of Ice, which I assume this is. There wasn't much of a description for this one, but I would say it's Tower of Ice. Pretty cool. On to the next mock. This is called Reissue Eliga. At least that's what the translation says. This is not in English on the Twitter post. And I believe the guy who made this is either JL or APRPRPRPRPRPRPRPRPR. Probably one too many PRs there, but that's his name. I did my best. So we were talking before about some posability stuff and just certain ways of approaching it. Well, here's a different way of approaching it. Yeah, your typical Lego set has certain amounts of posability on like the waist, the knees, the elbows, the neck, sometimes the waist, depending on what your set is, and also on the feet as well. And maybe a couple areas, a couple other additional places, depending. And sometimes, even on certain Matoran or some things, they don't even have articulation on the knees or the elbows. Some of the original sets don't, for that matter. But if you take a look at like action figures and some things, some of them have huge amounts of articulation in areas that Lego sets never really did. Like sometimes they can have toe articulation, multiple points of articulation in chests, multiple points of articulation in the neck or the head or the arms, all sorts of different things. And this mock kind of branches a little bit further into different realms of posability. So let's see how it does it. So one of the easiest things you can do that this mock does is having double or triple jointed elbows or knees. So we take a look at the elbows or knees on this mock here. Specifically, he's added a third joint, essentially. So you got the upper arm, then you have where the elbow is, and then you have the lower arm there. So technically, there's kind of three areas, and obviously you don't have the three specific areas on your body like that. But by adding that additional joint there, making it actually larger and more pronounced, you are able to actually get a lot more range of posability with it, and the poses that you can achieve are super cool, like this awesome superhero landing pose that this mock is doing here in this picture, which is rad, and it's able to do that because it has the triple double jointed knee kind of thing. Multiple points of articulation. I definitely recommend go out there and research some action figures. SH Figure Arts, Figma, Hot Toys even, all sorts of different stuff. Go out there and just look at it, or dig out your old toy box, find some action figures that you might have, and just study how those limbs have been designed. Where are the points of articulation? And figure out if you can replicate that in your own mocks. Because like we see here, this one has a lot more articulation than normal, and it's able to get a lot more poses with it. It's able to look more dynamic, look a bit more like Iron Man in that superhero landing pose. It's cool, right? Look at the way that his knee bends like that. Super rad. Lots of great stuff going on. And it's a very simple addition here, just simply adding in a third, very small little addition where the elbow or knee would be, just so that you're able to get even more out of the way that it poses. And very simple articulation, just some lift arms, ball joints, and a system dish on the side there to round it off. Or you kind of hug a mask on the side of it if it is the knee there. And it works really well. It looks pretty good. So yeah, nothing wrong with that. I think it looks good. It's something you could easily do yourself. Also, we see some articulation here on the waist, 10 points. It's looking pretty good. Pretty simple too, just simply adding in a ball joint there on the lower area of the waist, and then sort of roughly in the middle, that's where the actual ball joint itself is. And so that way, again, he can pose a little bit more, bending the waist like a normal human can do. So yeah, that's another way of kind of taking your articulation and really expanding on it a bit further. Actually, talking a little bit about the mock, love the color blocking on this, sort of concentrating the yellow just in certain areas of the mock, you know, on the lower legs and a little bit there on the arms like that. And then it kind of subtly blends into with the torso as well. There are birds screaming outside. If you can hear that, I apologize. Those birds are so disrespectful. Tweeting away. But that is nice how the colors kind of are localized in certain areas on the mock, and it's not too busy with too many colors going on. So it looks really nice. I like it a lot. I also really like the masks here on the shoulders. Always nice to see that. I always think masks on shoulders just looks really, really nice. I love it. Very cool to see. So let's move on to the next mock. And again, I'm going to struggle with this one because it is not written in English. This is a mock by, Neo. That is written in English. But the mock is called, I don't know. Twitter isn't letting me translate this one. Never mind. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of this mock. If anybody else knows it, please let me know in the comments, because I always like to actually physically credit the people who are in this. I don't know the name of this mock. But it is by Neo. There'll be a link in the description to their Twitter. Be sure to check them out. Besides the point though, one thing that I very much recommend if you want to have a super posable mock is actually going smaller. And why, you ask? Well, let me show you why. Let's just simply take a look at the upper arms on this piece, or on this mock rather. It is just one piece connected with two of those ball connection points that attach to mixel joints. And it's only one piece. And it works. Why? Because it's a really small mock. You don't need much on there because already it's quite small and it just kind of works, right? There's not much surface area to be covered here, so simply having it be one piece like that, it works well. If this was a larger mock, it may not work as well just simply having one piece be that upper or lower arm. It might work depending on the piece you use and how clever you are at using those pieces, but because the mock is smaller, you can do a lot less with it and it still works, it still looks good. And essentially that is this mock here. Really, the head is the only thing that uses a huge amount of pieces, but yeah, because it's so small, it doesn't need much, and as a result, you're really able to play with how posable stuff is. So this mock uses a lot of mixel joints, which traditionally are quite small pieces, specifically in relation to Bionicle stuff at least. And as a result, they just kind of work well for using or building them, using them when you're building a smaller scale mock. And I think we really effectively see that here on these arms again. You know, it basically makes up the majority of this lower arm here. And there's just a few other system pieces used there to make the rest of it, to sort of armor it up a little bit, give it a hand and stuff like that. And yeah, it works really well. So I'd recommend doing that by all means. Use some of those mixel joints because they're very sturdy pieces. They can actually hold up a lot of weight. So if you're adding huge amounts of pieces on them, you should be okay for the most part. And also like that too, they work very effectively on a small mock. But also we see your typical ball joints and socket connections here on the legs, and they simply just kind of form up the majority of that upper leg there. And again, not many pieces on it, but it works. And as a result, you're able to get a lot of posability with it. And then actually we got a different thing here, not using any socket or ball connection type pieces to have that action of articulation. Instead, it's simply attaching an axle into a pinhole connection and then kind of locking it in together on both sides there. And then you are actually able to move that just with the way those pieces naturally work. And so that's a way to have it articulate. So there you go. Multiple different ways of doing it. And because the mock is smaller, you can really just focus on how it moves and not have to focus on how you armor it up. Because really, I think from personal experience, that's when articulation can be a bit of a problem, is when you build this really nice frame, but then you add a bunch of armor over the top of it, and then the armor starts to get in the way of how the joints move, and then it stops articulation. Which is where the challenge comes in of, can you build a really awesome mock, but then can you make it pose too? Because it's pretty easy to build a statue. It's a lot more difficult to build a statue that can move and pose. So that's why you build a smaller mock here. Less surface area to cover, less stuff that can get in the way. And certainly one pro that really works if you want to have a really super posable mock is it can have a lot more character to it. If you can put it in all these different poses and things, you know, it looks more lively. It looks like it's alive and it has character and it does stuff and it has a personality, right? And I think one of the other things on this mock that really gives it character is all these different facial expressions. Now, these are using some printed system tile pieces. They're a bit older, these pieces, and they're very rare and kind of expensive, so it's a bit more difficult to come by them. Well, difficult to come by them in black. I think they also come in lime, red, and yellow, and they're a bit more cheaper. So just have a look over on Bricklink or eBay or places like that, see what you can find. It may not be that difficult to track down, just give it a look. But these are tiles that have the alphabet printed on them and some numbers as well. And using the right ones here to really effectively kind of communicate facial expressions is genius. It gives this mock so much personality and so much life, and the fact that it's also superposable very effectively complements that. That's just awesome to see. Really, really clever work there and a great use of pieces. I love what you done. On to the next mock. This is by Jack Frost and is called Azeroth the Destroyer of Worlds. So I wanted to quickly cover this because I was saying, well, hey, look, you don't have to add much sort of surface area to a mock when it's smaller. Well, here's the exact same thing done, but on a larger scale. So this mock specifically uses a really cool technique where you get Lego boat studs. Here's what boat studs are. That's what they look like. That's their Bricklink description. Making you do future work after you've done the episode, Ben. You got to edit stuff. But you can very effectively attach Technic pieces into them. You know, the general Technic hole that you would add a, Technic pin into, that effectively fits onto a stud. And then you kind of layer it like you see here in this image. And overall, you can actually get some pretty decent posability out of that. Sometimes, depending on how you make it, it can be a little bit more fragile to some degree, but it looks really nice, and you're able to get a really thin-looking arm here that very effectively represents this demon here, which is awesome to see. And then again, using some more prefab pieces, except these are prefab Galador pieces, and he's added some tires in the middle where they articulate, and because the tires kind of are that flexy material, it's not necessarily getting in the way of how it bends, so that's pretty cool. So again, it kind of depends on how you're designing the mock and the aesthetic that you're aiming for, but you can have pretty bare-bone designs that don't have a lot of armor or things that get in the way and don't actually use too many pieces, and as a result, it's just a lot easier for them to pose. So that's easily something you can do and something you can focus on there to achieve a really effective, beautiful look like this mock has. On to the final mock here. This is a mock by Shadowgear 6335 and is called Titan. So a couple final things that I think are quite important when you're building something that has some decent amount of articulation. If you're starting to go a little bit bigger with the mock, or you are using a lot of pieces in certain areas of the mock, it can be important to kind of factor in what pieces you use so that it can still articulate and hold up its own weight. So for example, a lot of official Lego sets did it, is they used piston pieces, and this mock uses them here on the back just to sort of support itself. And these are cool pieces because one, it does allow the mock to more effectively support itself. If things are getting a little bit heavier, you put this piston in here and it's able to just kind of counteract that and hold itself up, essentially. And it's quite simple to attach a piston, more or less. You just need to figure out areas on the mock that are a little bit heavier or that aren't really holding themselves up well, and just find a way of connecting the piston to it. So for example, say you build this mock and the feet really aren't effectively supporting the rest of the mock. So add a piston to the bottom of the foot and then have it connect to whatever's above it, which in this case would be the lower leg. And then, depending on where exactly the issue is on the mock, it should be able to hold it up a little bit more effectively. But of course, that depends on the specific problem you're trying to deal with. It might be the case that you just need to take off some pieces that's too heavy, but sometimes that's the perfect solution. And speaking of feet, we see on this mock here, Shadowgear 6335 has used some wheel pieces here. And these wheel pieces, of course, are that rubber material, so they kind of have a nicer bit of grip. And you actually see this in the official Lego Hulkbuster UCS set, using some tires there just to get a bit more grip into the bottom of the floor. Because they are that sort of more sturdy material, yeah, it helps it grip the floor and not sort of trip over itself, essentially, I guess. So that's something to do, is put some rubber tire pieces into the feet like that so that it can better and more effectively kind of grip the ground and kind of lock itself down to some degree. Now, this mock also very effectively uses ratchet joints. Now, these came in some not Hero Factory sets, those came in some Exoforce sets and a fair few other sort of Technic and system sets. I'll throw up the Bricklink name here. You're seeing it right in front of you right now. These pieces are very effective in holding up a lot of weight. They're very sturdy parts, and they have that kind of ratchet, clanky kind of effect. Whenever you turn it, it very much locks into place. So they're very strong and sturdy. So if you are building a Titan, I'd very much recommend you use these because they're sturdy and they're strong and they get the job done. So again, Brendan's used them on here because he's building a Titan. It's very effective and very smart, and he's able to very effectively support its own weight because he's used those. So factor that in. Take a look at all the different things. Exo4 sets have some other types of ratchet joints as well. Focus in on those. Can you use that in whatever MOC you're making? Will that be able to more effectively support something? Your typical ball joint and socket might not be sturdy enough to hold up this massive axe that your MOC is holding. But if it uses these ratchet joints, maybe it could get the job done. Play it by ear, experiment a little, see what works, see what's good for you. Of course, whatever you're building is going to be its own unique issue. But you're more than welcome to message me and ask me some questions. I'll see how I can help. But I've shown you a bunch of different ways that articulation can work on multiple different MOCs in multiple different ways. And hopefully, like I said, my aim was just to kind of provide this, nice kind of helpful guide of just different ways of approaching articulation and a bit of, tips and tricks for that. So hopefully that was beneficial to you. And if it was, let me know. I hope it was. So thank you very much for watching this episode. If you want to submit some of your own MOCs to the show, you can. You can do so through the email you're currently seeing on the screen. If you want to be sure to kind of copy and paste that is also in the description below, so be sure to check that out. All you need to do is send an email to that email address and just put a few pictures. If you've got a link to the MOC, you can. Any other necessary information you want. If you want me to call you something specifically in the episode, let me know in the email. Any information you want to put it in, and then I'll add it to the list, and one day it'll be on the show. Always have a bit of a backlog. Don't let that discourage you, though. One day you'll be on the show. I do my best to cover everyone that submits. Also, be sure to check the links in the description for the MOCs that you saw in today's episode. Everyone who's in this are some talented, fantastic builders. They built some other great stuff. Definitely worth checking out what they've done. And you never know, some of their other MOCs might articulate articulation in some interesting ways that might kind of give you a bit of inspiration yourself. Also, some of the links to my stuff is in the description, so if you want to check that out, feel free to do so. So for Mr. Shumi4000, PPR, Neo, Jack Frost, and ShadowGear6335, you made some cool MOCs, and hopefully you've inspired some people. Thanks for watching, happy building, see you in the next one. Bye for now. Oh, by the way, I'm using a new microphone. I didn't want to say anything because I think it sounds almost identical to my other one, but it's not a headset, which I love. So, if you're still listening, let me know if you noticed. I want to know. I think it's cool. I like this change. Let me know. If you don't like it, I won't use it. Plain and simple. Thanks.